We will go ahead and call the April 6th, 2023 meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission to order. That's fun. Can we have the roll, please? Didn't have this in the study session.
Chairman Lane,
Present.
Commissioner Sibley,
Present.
Commissioner Jacoby,
Present.
Commissioner Barnard,
Present.
Councilmember Rodriguez. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we do in fact have a quorum, although just barely, so we can continue. First item of business is approval of the March 2nd meeting minutes. Do any commissioners have any comments or corrections? And if not, I'd entertain a motion. Okay, we've got a motion to approve from Commissioner Barnard and seconded by Commissioner Jacoby. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. Report from the chair. I don't have anything in particular to talk about tonight. So we'll move on to communications from HPC staff.
All right, is that on?
I think so.
All right, good deal. I actually do have a few things this month. First and foremost, Callahan House has come to me regarding curbing that they are working with with Public Works on. So there's some street work being proposed for 3rd Avenue that could impact the historic curbing in front of the Callahan House. It's the Callahan House's board that these particular curbs are part of the historic property, and they really want to preserve and repair them. However, there's a disconnect in that Public Works really thinks that replacement is necessary. They do think they can match the style. There is a pretty distinctive style to this curb. That is, taller than what you would normally see, has an interesting little groove on it. They are pretty confident they can match that style, but the color matching would be a challenge because of the age, but also because of the material differences in terms of what was used in concrete then versus now. Part of the issue of Public Works thinking that they won't be able to preserve the existing curbs is they do need to put some gutter pans in for drainage purposes. So bringing this as an information item at this point, the ultimate question is what role does this commission want to play in this process, and whether you would like me to arrange to have representatives from the Callahan House and Public Works at the May meeting to give some additional detail on this project.
Anybody here have a comment? Yeah. Commissioner Barnard?
I think Callahan House is kind of a big deal. I mean, it's kind of like a signpost for what historic preservation is. So I think we should look at whatever we can on it, whether we can approve, or should. Anything I think is maybe we determine later, but at least get an update on what's going on, and maybe the staff can tell us at another time what provisions there are for us to approve it or not approve it.
That is a city-owned property, right?
Correct, it is a city-owned property. And this is the curbing that's adjacent to the street as well. They do have a pretty significant grant they've obtained to do some restoration work on the house, and part of that work does include some of the concrete on the property as well. So concrete is on their mind. So
I would suggest that we need to be sure that we are asking the city to uphold the same standards that we would expect of anyone else that might be coming in here. That, so whether or not that's necessary in this particular case, it's at least worth looking at.
Great. Well, I'll touch base with the folks I've been working with, I've been talking to, and have them prepare something for the May meeting to bring to this board. The other thing I owe you is an update on the Terry Lake Sewer Project that we talked about last week, or last month, I should say. It's all kind of a blur. So speaking with our Public Works staff, this is going through the county permitting process. So it's a private developer building this line. It would serve the region. Basically, there would be some reimbursements from future developers, but basically, a private developer is building this to facilitate development of a property in that area. The public improvement plans have been approved by the city. They still are working on the actual public improvement agreement. Easements for the lines as it's designed have been recorded. So I'll continue to work with the county and see what can be done. But the feedback I've gotten from the engineering folks is that it's a pretty heavy lift to redesign. That it would basically be almost a complete redesign of this particular project. So I'll continue to see what we can do as far as, if not outright preservation, memorialization of the farms. But I just from what I know of the engineering processes and the design processes, I think it would be a pretty substantial cost and effort, and not to mention time consideration to deal with this. That said, we'll definitely continue to communicate with our, Public Works staff, that when we have projects like this, to make sure that they communicate with historic preservation staff as well.
And what role at this point is Boulder County's HPC playing?
They're advisory at this point as well, so that's the role they're playing, so.
Did they meet after us at all? I mean, we were giving them some information.
Yeah, I haven't received any additional information from their liaison on that, so I'll continue to coordinate with them and see if there's some happy medium that we can find as well. So, this is a project that basically finished going through our city processes probably close to a year ago, so it's been through some pretty substantial efforts. It's not like it's early in the design phase, so it's pretty easy to reroute things. But moving forward, definitely we'll be communicating with our members of the DRC, of our Development Review Committee, that hey, when you see projects like this, if it looks like it's going to impact something old, let me know. So we can determine if it's something that we need to address or not. So. That's what I have on that. I also, Glenn and I have been in communication with folks in our clerk's office. We're going to work on having a proclamation for Historic Preservation Month at the May 23rd City Council meeting. And then Commissioner Norton was a great help in tracking down some project costs and grant amounts for various surveys and preservation plans completed in recent years. So we have some numbers to work with. Around $25,000, give or take, seems to be going more or less. It could be, obviously depending on size of the area, size of the city, et cetera. But, we feel like it's a workable number that we can get to.
Great.
So.
Questions for
That's what I have.
staff? Oh, you're
There we go. For the Terry Lake project, when stuff like that happens, assuming that it's just going to go forward, are those properties maybe going to be documented at all so that maybe there's records of it for the future? I kind of figure there probably is a process for that.
So there are cultural resource surveys for both of these properties, so we do have that information. I still need to track down and see if there was ever a SHPO letter that was generated for it. So, but we do have, surveys for those properties, so.
That was the one that was part of Longmont, right?
So there's-
property was on.
Yeah, so there's two of them. There's the Beaupre property, which is part of Longmont, and then there was the Nishita Farm, which is in unincorporated. The part that that is in Longmont, the Beaupre property, those structures are the ones that look like they're gonna be saved, or at least not demolished at this point in time. But the Nishida property would be impacted by this. So and it's a real challenge because they are close to 66, and then future widening of the highway could also present some challenges as well. So we definitely have some, you know, I don't want to say compromises, but we have some coordination to do to see what we can do to facilitate at least recognition of these properties.
Couple things. First, easier thing on the widening of the highway. It was a research project that I worked in a while ago, and I wouldn't look for that project to come to fruition anytime in the foreseeable future. Just, you know, it's been at the same exact stage for about 4 or 5 years now since CDOT put out their review of it.
It's on the
And-
long range of the long-range plan.
Yeah, and so, and as far as I know, it's not on the city agenda at all. Second, I'm trying to remember, and this is, I'm kind of having to reach a little bit, about the property, the Terry Lake property, that I seem to remember some discussion, and it could be wrong, that this was at city council with, that, from the developer, that in the short-term plan, once they get this thing going, is to have the city looking at incorporating that into the city. And I guess my question is, in that incorporation process, would it be then subject to possible review of Historic Preservation Commission, or would that be too late? Once it's all done, and then the city annexes it, and then it's part of the city, and if it had been our choice, we wouldn't have necessarily approved all those things, but we didn't. They take those decisions because it's county property now.
So my understanding, and I'll need to go back and take a look at this, Glenn, please correct me if I'm misspoken. My understanding is this development project would be for a portion of that area that's already incorporated into the city, because we were the initial reviewer on these public improvement plans. I'll have to go back and do a little bit more research on that. But yeah, as part of the annexation process, if this came through an annexation, it would probably cross my desk most likely, just as a staff planner, but the historic elements would definitely come up as part of that annexation discussion. So,
We do an annexation agreement, so that's a good opportunity to ask for certain things. So that part you have right, Commissioner.
correct, yes. So I guess my response is, I need to go back and take a look and see what the annexation documents for this say.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for staff? No? Okay, great. Thank you for those updates. All right, so now we have public invited to be heard. So we do have a couple of folks out here in the audience and it's on the sign-up sheet. So if you'd like, you could come up. Are you here to make any kind of comment, or no, you're just here to just be entertained? All right. Okay. All right, perfect. Well, thanks for showing up. All right. Okay, seeing no one else in the audience, we will close the public invited to be heard. The public hearing portion of the meeting appears to not be necessary. We don't have any public hearing items on our agenda. So then we'll move on to new business and board recruitment. What are we talking about here? We losing people?
Okay, so basically it's board recruitment time. We aren't losing any people, but we are pretty full on this board, aside from, I think we're short an alternate. So if, you know, we're in a pretty good shape, but we can continue to communicate with the clerk's office, regarding, you know, pursuit of an additional alternate, or just hold off until the end of the year and start over in January.
Do we have anybody, is anybody expiring this December?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
So, just basically putting it out there that our clerk is in board recruitment mode, so.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess if anyone has a friend that wants to be an alternate, they would have been welcome tonight, right? I mean, so.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks. All right, then on to prior business, which was not very long prior. Our 2023 retreat follow-up, so that was only a few days ago.
Let's mic up here. So I captured our whiteboard notes and have them up on the screen. So just really kind of an overview of what we discussed in terms of additions, changes, tweaks that we need to make to our ordinance. One item, there were a couple items we wanted to discuss further. One I noted was this question of period of significance versus 50 years. So that is something. The other question related to, and this is probably the second item is more long-term, but that would be, design guidelines for replacement of demolished buildings. So the big things we wanted to discuss, I think following up, and if anyone has anything else to discuss, we can jump in. Was that period of significance? We talked about state programs. That's something we're continuing to look at. And items that we needed to look at in terms of doing cultural resource surveys and preservation plans. The question of certificate of merit, and let's see, as well. And the really big one was property owner outreach. So that was another big one. That was less code and more work plan. So with that, we can pull up any of the attachments that we had on Saturday if folks want to discuss anything in particular. Glenn, is there anything, did I capture? I kind of skimmed through it.
Miss local, you scroll down. There's an addition to local.
Oh, yeah. It was,
You're talking about that top
yes.
item, the local to historic?
Yes,
Yeah,
070.
right, that was just a note to call it a local
To
historic
specify,
district.
right. So just to clarify between local and National Register.
Right, because we have 3 historic districts, but they're national districts. We have no local districts, we only have local landmarks. And the code section that we were talking about at that time was if someone wanted to actually take the time to create a local historic district, right, yeah. Yeah, so. Yeah, yeah. So I guess I'd take feedback from the commissioners. Do we want to pull up that ordinance language again and cruise through that? I know there were a couple of points that I forced everybody to stop talking about so we could get through it.
We're moving kind of fast at the end, so maybe we start at the end and go backwards.
That'd be okay.
There we go.
Yeah, maybe run it all the way down to the last page.
Okay. Yeah, so this particular section, application for designation of a historic district, it would be a local, just adding in local district here.
Yeah,
So
Good.
that's really what we're talking about here. All right, so down to the bottom.
yeah.
It's for demos. All right.
Yeah, one thing on the enforcement part, there actually is a paragraph that has to do with enforcement that's more in the center of the ordinance. It's kind of a weird place. So I might move the location of this section, but other than that, I think 2.56150 is where we've referenced enforcement. And then the other thing, when we talk about maintenance requirements, something that I saw, I think it was in the Lafayette ordinance, it references the International Property Maintenance Code, which is a code we enforce anyhow. It's through code enforcement. So it kind of gives a minimum standard, but it's kind of a good place to start as far as defining somebody neglecting their property. So I think that would be a good addition as well. And then when we went through the criteria, I think maybe a lot of that is redundant because we describe what historic properties are. So I don't know that we need to go through that paragraph 2 describing what it is. That's up a little bit.
Okay. Well, let's, maybe if we just hit these two little sections and make sure no one had any further points of discussion. I will say, let's let the record show that the Commissioner Fenster has arrived.
He's in the building.
I have a word on that subject. Commissioner Fenster has waited behind both railroads for 45 minutes.
Oh, my God.
It is the height of the day, and the development of Longmont, in some measure, including the preservation of its historic places, depends on doing something about a medieval railroad running in two directions through the town.
Happens to everybody.
I'm aware of a railroad crossing that has its own Twitter page, that's because it's so, has its own Twitter account, it's so bad and notorious.
Is that at Martin Street?
No, it's in Jacksonville. It's the San
Okay.
Marco train.
All right, so the maintenance requirements, so other than adding in reference to the International Property Maintenance Code, which is, of course, as Glenn mentioned, adopted by the city, any other comments on this, or are we good with this provision? Okay. So then enforcement and penalties, I'm gonna scroll down to that, that's the last piece, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this basically references the section of the municipal code that is the typical enforcement, which I think I mentioned is a $500 fine and up to 90 days in jail. But then we go a little bit further, and we've seen this in other codes, and this was actually researched by our outside counsel, where their communities impose, maybe more painful is a moratorium on permits for a period of time. So we've added that in to the potential draft.
Right, and these, just to clarify, these only apply to a landmarked property. It has to be designated landmark.
In this
Or-
case,
Or would it be designated refers back to
well,
something that,
demolition goes above and beyond designated, and so this would be enforcing that as well,
okay,
right?
okay. Well, I just want to make sure that when we say alterations to a designated property, what does designated mean?
A local landmark.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So it does not, because in other areas here, we refer to a building that might be historic,
Right.
and that might be something that has a cultural resource survey that says it has some value. But we're not talking about that kind of a property in this particular code language.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the nuance is when we're talking about maintenance, now we're talking about maintenance of a designated structure. So it doesn't do anything as far as a historic structure, which might be, we have a survey on it. This goes and enforces against a landmark or an adopted local district. So, but the enforcement chapter is anything in the ordinance. Those enforcement rules affect.
Okay. Yeah. Commissioner Jacoby.
Yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying, but what I'm seeing here, it says on that last line, B2, moving or demolishing a designated property or an undesignated property that is subject to section 2.56.190 can get the moratorium on building permits. And that says it doesn't have to be designated if you go back to that section there, the 2.56.190. So I get the sense that undesignated properties can also be subject to fines?
And that has to do with demolitions, right? So that's
Yes.
exactly what I'm saying, is
So,
the penalty goes to anything in the ordinance, including demolition. It's the section right before that regarding demolition by neglect is what you're calling it. We're calling it maintenance requirement. That is specifically for designated properties.
okay, because this is, so the demolition by neglect is for designated properties, but this is referring to other properties as well, but that's for demolishing a designated or an undesignated property that's subject to this section. That's included?
Where,
I'm sorry, I'm not good at reading this stuff, but I get the sense that this is more inclusive from the word.
I would agree, yeah. This B2 looks like includes a property of historic value in the demolition, within the scope of the demolition ordinance. So anything we've identified above in the ordinance, which includes, properties that might have value because they've been identified as a cultural resource survey or a contributing building within a district, then those would be covered by that 256.190. Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right.
Okay. Okay, well, this feels like it's pretty clean and simple, and especially if it's consistent with what other cities are doing across the region, it makes sense to me.
The only other thought I had, we had that wonderful spreadsheet that was made for us. Most cities are are fining up to $1,000. And Boulder, of course, they have deep pockets. They charge up to $5,000 for fines. We're charging $500. I don't know if it'd ever come up, but I'm wondering, is $500? Most communities seem to think a higher amount would be a better deterrent. I'm not sure why we have $500 and if it's worth going to $1,000, like the majority of communities that are on that spreadsheet.
yeah, if we moved it all into chapter 15 for a zoning violation, those fees bump up. So
Okay.
that would be an advantage to have it in chapter 15. And I'm not sure what that number is, but it's certainly more than 500.
Okay.
In
Yeah,
fact, I think it's per day too.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Honestly, though, I'm not sure the dollar amount matters a whole heck of a lot, even
don't-
if it's
yeah,
500 or 1,000. The
Yeah.
big, the thing, the stick here is the permit. If you do something untoward with your property, now you're stuck. So I think that's the bigger challenge, but that's my, yeah. Whoops, sorry, hold on, I got,
For the staff, question, what happens after the one-year moratorium on all building permits? And secondly, what happens after the two-year moratorium? What happens then? It's as if,
Depends on what it
Nothing happens?
is. If it's a designated property or in a district, I think they have to come before the HPC to get approval of what they build on the site. If it's undesignated, they just come in for a building permit, I believe.
But now, would it then be true, because when we revise this ordinance, that basically says if you have a contributing building in this district, then these requirements apply, so therefore, when you apply, I mean, you would need a database that said, this is a contributing building, so it would potentially get flagged again when the building permit comes up, because otherwise, how do you know? Right? I mean, if we say, okay, all of these types of properties are included in this ordinance, then there has to be a mechanism for somebody to know that, I mean, we can do mailings and whatever to notify people that this ordinance is changing and it might affect their property and whatever, but after the fact, let's say it does in fact pass, there's gotta be a mechanism for staff to say, oh, well, this has to be reviewed by staff liaison to see if, under the same, so that's gonna have to be put into place, otherwise you'll have no way to track it.
Well, we define it in a number of ways, and one of them is through a preservation plan, which would be the ideal thing. But I think there's enough things in there that we could catch it prior to that. Because anything that has a survey that says it meets 3 of the 4 criteria or something like that, or is contributing to a potential district, falls under that historic property, which the demolition part addressed. But I'll take a look at it and make sure that it's there. But yeah, we talked about on Saturday that notice is really important. So I think at a minimum, we would get out the notice to anything we have identified now immediately. But our goal is to do that preservation plan. That would further, I guess, make it more of a public record.
Right. Commissioner Sibley?
Yeah, this may just be not understanding all of the permitting part. But when we were talking about enforcement and penalties, and we've got the permit lapse of 180 days without extension, I'm not entirely sure what that is meaning, number one. Number two, I work for a developer, and I know it takes them sometimes 3 months to get an email out. So I don't know that extending, a denial of permits or something for a handful of months would be that big of a deal. So when I, look over at Loveland, who is saying 5 years, of no permits, I think, oh, well, now that would hurt a developer, or, somebody that was thinking, okay, the money is a small amount of what their considerations are, but time is, more important sometimes. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there too, because I'm not exactly sure. I may be missing the point a little bit. So that was it.
I think our outside attorney thought maybe that was too big of a stick. Because we did look at it, because they're anywhere from 0 to 5 years. So we kind of split the difference to what he thought was more doable.
And I will add, I worked in Loveland for 5 years before coming here, and I don't recall ever hearing about that ever being applied. So it may be there on paper, but I don't know that it's ever been implemented. So things could have changed. Yeah, things could have changed, but I'm not aware that was implemented.
Okay.
Good question.
So what other sections should we be looking at here? So we're good with the maintenance and we're good with the,
Well, maybe go up to 2.56190. And I think I put in the first criteria about the period of significance for a number of reasons. I see that's maybe not a good criteria. So I think we would probably just take that out entirely. But like this paragraph 2, we basically describe what we've defined earlier of what a historic property is. So I think that what will be paragraph 1 could be much shorter, basically. The one thing we didn't talk about a lot is chapter 5. And we've seen this in other codes where you can't just come in and demolish property and leave it, well, you can certainly leave it vacant, but part of this says you need to show us something that fits within that district. So I referenced a section in the Land Development Code, which doesn't have anything in it yet, but would be those design guidelines, basically. In the interim, we could just say, consistent with the Secretary of Interior goals for historic properties or something along that lines. But we do have some planners on staff basically, and our intent is that we get them started on what those design guidelines would look like. And we just, you're probably familiar, Steve, I mean, where we have the design guidelines, architectural guidelines, we would just roll it into there. And it'd be something like design guidelines for the original town center or something. And I'm hoping this will help satisfy some of the concerns we've heard from Henna as well, that development should be consistent with the neighborhood. And someday I'll show you what the governor is proposing, but we won't do that tonight.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, all right, so let's, I guess, any comments on these 5 provisions?
Well, for this section, it's not specifically on those 5 provisions, but the section is titled Review of Permits for Demolition and Removing of Undesignated Structures, if we had undesignated, removal of total. When you say permits for demolition, that to me implies total demolition. But again, if that, looking at that breakdown of what different cities are doing, most cities are also adding partial demolition. And you do define partial demolition earlier in this as greater than 50% of the building, which is a very significant amount to become officially partial demolition rather than just modification. So I would suggest you specify review of permits for full and partial demolition, not just permits for demolition. Because if you're demolishing more than 50% of a building, I think you're having a significant impact, and I think that should be included.
Yep, well, that's arguable, but if demolition is defined earlier, if the term demolition is defined as X, Y, and Z, then you don't need to repeat it again here, because it's.
Is demolition defined
I
as full
think we
and
did,
partial?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we did
We did
define
change
it.
it.
And, well, you defined partial demolition, but you defined demolition as including full and partial in this kind of instance.
Be worth
Right,
checking.
so if you're
Okay.
touching it at all, yeah, basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, because
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
That's
All
our
right.
And
intent.
it's good to have that sort of thing in one place, especially just because what often happens is the language changes just a little bit, and then you start parsing goofy little words here and there. So as long as we
Right.
have it covered, I would say we're okay, but it should be defined clearly that demolition includes any of these things.
I get cross-eyed reading legal documents like this, but so long as it's included, I'm fine with it if you say it's in there.
So specifically, one of the topics that we talked about in the retreat that we never quite resolved was this, within the original subdivision, city subdivision, any structure X within a period of significance. I think we were leaning back towards any structure 50 years, or older, and just, which I don't know is a particularly problematic, well, it's gonna get there, right, eventually, and we'll just have to deal with it, but, it seemed like there wasn't a better way to handle that. So I think we're in agreement there that that's just gonna go back to 50 years.
I think some of us that we don't see 1973 as historic, and maybe that's what I stumble on.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting there.
Yeah, the 50-year requirement, that's a pretty standard. I know Holly and Gata both made Commissioners Norton and Guy made the comment that that's pretty much the widely accepted standard within historic preservation, so it makes sense to stick with it.
Yeah. And so my only other comment, and this is just really just a wording in two, section two, near the end, state or federal registers or determined to be a contributing resource.
I
I don't
caught
know if we
that
got,
too.
did we get that last time? I can't remember if
Yeah.
we did. Okay, all right. Let's see, Commissioner Sibley.
Yeah, and I think that it was Fort Collins where I read this. I have too many things highlighted, sorry. But there, in one of the sections, it did say that it was, contributing buildings and blah, 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 things that have been designated. But they just blanketed it and said anything 50. And I thought that that's, kind of what was on here too. But I thought that was kind of interesting because who knows, sometimes things slip by because of other changes, but there could be some important things to save. So I just wanted to throw that out. I'm pretty sure that was in the Fort Collins stuff. that I read.
One thing I noticed that caught me as odd in Fort Collins is they excluded single-family residents from the 50 years old.
I didn't see that.
I don't know why, but it was, I don't know whether it was commercial buildings are more important to them, or
Covered somewhere else?
maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll highlight that, because I picked up on that, and I go, well, that is an oddity that I haven't seen.
Yeah. I did not catch that part. I just saw the less than 50 or anything that was 50. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I would definitely include residential, so, okay.
They applied the demolition to anything that's on a state or federal designation too. Or is contributing or, yeah.
It was pretty broad.
It was.
Yeah.
And they have funds available to keep you from demolishing.
Commissioner Barnard.
At the risk of being a nitpicker, A2, at the end of the sentence, it says district. I think you need a T there.
Yes. Somebody caught that on Saturday.
Did we? Yeah, it's
Might have been me
a
then,
little bit
too.
of a blur. I am looking at this now and wondering, so the difference between 1 and 2, in effect, 2 is a little bit more narrow, right? And 1 is pretty broad. So does it make, this is just a question, does it make sense to just use 2 for everything? Because or do we really want anything that's 50 years or older within the original subdivision to be reviewed? Because at some point, we're gonna end up reviewing, buildings that were built in, 1980, 1973, and is that the intent? Should we just put everything into a structure identified as a cultural resource survey, et cetera, et cetera?
I thought it was within the original subdivision that's 50 years old, but doesn't look like it. Yeah, I guess in today's code, it just says anything within the original city subdivision. And then if you're outside the originals, then you have the standard of there has to be a survey done or.
Right. And just a question, I don't know if any commissioners have a thought about that, or whether we want to be broader inside that original subdivision or not. Commissioner Sibley.
I'm mouthy today.
That's all right.
I'm going to throw it out there to keep it fairly broad and wide. I don't know exactly what all the stuff is that's, they're talking about for, to change the housing and things like that. You were talking about the stuff coming maybe from the governor's office. My house is built in the 68, and I can see possibly one day in the future that a ranch-style house that has a 2-car garage and its own driveway is going to be a historic thing. And so, even though today, not so exciting, but in the future, somebody else might be looking back at that going, oh, I wish we would have saved more of those houses because they have all been demolished for condos or something. So I guess I'm in favor of keeping it broad, so.
All right, let's see, first I've got, I'm gonna go in order here. Commissioner Jacoby,
I would echo Commissioner Sibley. I think covering, retrospective scopes are wonderful if you've got one that works well, you know, and trying to figure what would be worth saving, what's not. In the intermediate term, I don't think as a society, we've been very good at that. I mean, we tear things down that are moderately old that we don't value, and then later we say those are valuable. So I think the 50-year mark, I think, is good. In fact, I was thinking, you may cringe at this, but going the other way, for outside the original city subdivision, maybe we should look at all structures over 75 years old and add that to it. I can tell you, there's this wonderful house, I think it's 11 15th Avenue. I encourage you to look at it. It looks like it's as old as anything downtown. It is probably, original homestead house that's been swallowed up. There's nothing near it that looks nearly as old. It's out by the slough and by one of the irrigation ditches, and it was an original farm home. I'll bet it's not on our radar, and our surveys, we just frankly aren't up on our surveys yet. If we're going to rely on our surveys for this, we're going to miss things, I think. And this house I'm thinking of, and it's just one example, it's in so-so shape. It could use a lot of work. I could see someone saying, let's just tear it down and build something else. And it wouldn't be on our radar with this language. So I would say any house or any structure over 75 years, if it's outside of the original city, Mark, something to consider.
okay. Commissioner Fenster.
Yes. I'm wondering whether the city of Longmont has made an effort to period classify development and construction in the city bounds. In other words, have we looked at the city comprehensively to, I don't want to use the word landmark, to identify period structures where we have some reason to know that they are of landmark quality for that period. For example, when you mention 1973, for some of us who look at such things, 1973 was a particular period of time in which certain kinds of residential structures were built, and it had very little years predecessor and only a few years successor. But with a small L at landmarks, those particular houses, have we made any effort to more comprehensively period where construction has been done within the city limits?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think that would be the point of trying to really push the preservation plan and the survey, is to really start to do that. And that's why I think the language in number 2 right now is good, because if, knowing that we're trying to push that preservation plan and some surveys, the fear of putting, a timeline on the entire city, the other goal is we want to get this ordinance passed. And if we have some blanket coverage that every house in the city could be, coming in here for a garage addition, it's not going to pass, because if anybody pays attention to it, they're going to lose their minds, and it's going to be overly cumbersome, right? So if we can say, all right, this is what we have, we're going to try to get this preservation plan that's going to actually start to identify some things, and then we can that whole process of a preservation plan can be and should be an open public process, so people can come in and say, hey, we think our neighborhood's really cool, and we'd be really excited about the idea of, eventually having some kind of designation, or get off of my lawn, so I think to me, this feels right.
Without making a special deal about the original.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, and we can have the original, we can have the number 1 within the original city subdivision, 50 years or older. But I like the language in 2 because it's specific enough while also remaining flexible.
Yeah.
Any other comments or on this section before we scroll? What other pieces of this ordinance were we
That-
overly chatty about on Saturday?
That was the major part. That's the meat of the matter right there.
Okay, so what do you, go ahead, let's see. Commissioner Jacoby.
This is still sort of my pet project, but I don't know if we ever came to conclusion about doing something about a certificate of merit. And again, when we designate a house, it serves 2 functions. It serves to recognize the house as something special in our community, but it also serves to give us some oversight into the maintenance of the historic character. Those are 2 different things, and I think we could modify our certificate of merit to require a certificate of appropriateness for external additions if we hung the carrot of the permit incentives we give for historically designated homes. We can't give them the tax incentives. We wouldn't give them a little brass plaque. We'd give them a little bit less, but we would still retain some control of the exterior appearance and maintenance of some of these historic, but maybe not so special homes. So I still think it's worth thinking about. I would vote for it, but I haven't heard a lot from other commissioners what you think, if you think we should pursue this or not, and add it to the code.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best to speak for Commissioners Norton and Gayu, and they can yell at me next time if I'm wrong, but I got the impression from the retreat that from the perspective of the State Historical Society, that they were not particularly in favor of that because it was their, I think the phrase was preservation light. And so it was just sort of this muddy middle ground of not actually upholding standards, and it was maybe a little muddier. I thought, when you first proposed the idea, I thought it was, oh, this is really cool. But thinking about just how it gets implemented, maybe we just need to get properties, surveyed and then get homeowners, informed about the benefits of, potentially designating their properties and getting money for it. I mean, maybe it's a little more just outreach. I don't know. That was the impression I got from, I started backing off it Saturday because of that.
I don't see it muddying things. If we use the same language for permit incentives that we have already, and for the certificate of appropriateness requirements that we have already, it's not really, it is, historic preservation light, but I do think it serves a purpose. I think we have a need.
Well, I think it's worth keeping on the topic, especially when those 2 are back here and can
Okay.
talk through it a little more. I think we
Yeah.
ought to, I don't have a problem keeping it in our list of items that we're kind of talking about as a commission.
Okay. If you want to put it off.
Okay, any other comments about the ordinance? Okay, hold on, Sibley.
This is, no, it's your fine. And it's not so much about the ordinance, but I thought of Rick's suggestion when I was reading, again, through one of the cities. They have heritage awards, yearly, and I think that was actually Fort Collins again, but it might have been Lafayette, I can't remember. But anyways, I thought that was kind of interesting, and, if we ever entertained such a thing, if you could possibly do something that, maybe would celebrate somebody's success if they redid a building that maybe didn't hit some of the other qualifications and can't get a brass plaque and all those kinds of things. But, hey, you know what? You guys did an amazing job doing what you could to save this house or whatever, But anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there as kind of a also-ran idea, so.
Thanks, Commissioner Fenster.
Yeah, before we leave the subject, I want to go back to the notion of historic and this commission doing something that anticipates the oncomingness of the classification of historic. So we have all of us have a rather colonial predicate for historic, but there are period pieces in Longmont, and some of them really stand out, and they are not classically historic. They are, however, call them monument pieces. They're worth preservation if that can be made economically viable for the owners, et cetera, et cetera. And the owners ought to know that these structures have historic significance. A 1973 house built in Longmont, Colorado has, for me, based on my background, historic significance, which will be known in the future. So in our capacity, isn't there something more comprehensive that we can do that anticipates that part of the future?
A preservation plan.
Well, yeah, it gets to that. It gets to that eventually.
Yeah.
But it may start with some kind of notice to the city that it needs to do something more. That history is not confined to what is today historic.
That's a good point. All right, well, let's see, let's move on from the ordinance. Well, I guess in terms of next steps, Glenn, you'll take this back to your attorney consultant? Or?
Yes, yeah, and ultimately, we probably want to get you guys to get one more look at it, and I'll present it to council in a work session, maybe prior to doing all the final drafting.
Okay.
Make sure.
Is it
we're all
helpful
on
for have any of the commissioners at that work session? Or
Could be.
or not? Well, if that is helpful, then feel free to reach out.
Okay.
I'm sure there would be people willing to do that. Okay, so then on to some of the other topics we had. From the retreat. So with respect to the cultural resource surveys, there was a note from even last, in the meeting minutes about a consultant that you all had that was experienced with grant writing, so.
Yeah, and I think we all talked about that survey plan is really an important first step, and at those prices, we can do that.
Yeah, great. Great, okay.
Of course, there has been inflation since the summer, so
Well, Commissioner Guy was throwing out twice that amount, so I was happy to hear that it was a little more affordable.
yeah. When you do get into the preservation plan, that would probably be something we would probably budget for next year.
Right.
But I think $20,000, I think we can do that with our current budget.
Great. Let's see, and then I know we have a little more, is this the end of the document, or is you?
Pretty much, this is.
Yeah, there you
We've
go.
covered, yeah, so,
I was in there, I wasn't making it up.
yeah, so we're towards the end. So we've already talked about the certificate of merit. We haven't really covered the outreach efforts as much.
Right, so I did want to cover that.
Okay.
Specific to Commissioner Jacoby's suggestion that we consider potentially pursuing a landmark status for the Tower of Compassion. So I just, I took the opportunity to reach out to Carl McWilliams, since I know him, and just wanted to get a sense of what it might take to get a cultural resource survey of that building, because I don't know that we have one. And he threw out maybe a max of $1,500, which doesn't seem like a terribly
Okay.
onerous amount. And so I was wondering, I think that's a great idea. I think it's, and so I think, if we can, if the commission is behind it, what could we do to kind of push that forward? And I also wanted to suggest that maybe we ought to ask, or at least talk to Parks and say, we're thinking about doing this. Is that, you got any heartburn over that? Because we seem, I don't want to be the bull in the china shop here either.
That's a great idea. I will mention, Commissioner Sibley found this, which has a great picture of it. Where did you find this, Suzanne?
I was grabbing lunch in Louisville, and there was just a little kiosk on the side of the thing, and it just had a pile of those, and I thought, I'll be darned.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and,
Has it-
talked about the family that, family members that built that were from Hiroshima, and I mean, there was just all kinds of
Yeah.
great information in there, I thought, so.
There's a great timeline, and it's like 4 or 5 pictures on the history of Longmont, going back to BC. So,
Wow, okay. Well, so what would be the appropriate, well, okay, let me first ask. Is there anyone here that thinks that's a bad idea to pursue? Okay, all right. So, given that, would it be appropriate for staff to reach out, or would it be appropriate for me as a chair of this commission to reach out to the, chair of Parks and just say,
We can do that.
yeah, okay.
We can do that.
And
Have
then-
that conversation with them.
And then do you think it would be easy enough to, if there's no issue, no roadblock there, then to simply just hire Carl to do that survey? What would take,
Yeah, if it's that amount, that's possible. Yeah.
because we even have some funds associated with HBC, right? I don't know what that is, but I thought it was,
Really?
Karen told us that a long time ago, there was like, I don't know, some city budget of some $1,000, whatever, 5,000, 8,000, maybe it was 10, I don't know. That was sort of available. That's what she used when she sent out the mailing, right? She said she had some sort of budget.
I'll have to confirm that. I'll check with Jane. I do know that some of that budget was used for sending folks to the Saving Places Conference, and also just making sure we have a stash of the historic landmark plaques as folks come in with landmark applications, so, or need replacements, so.
Okay,
But I'll check with Jane on that.
okay, thanks. Do you want any kind of formal motion that the commission recommends that we get a cultural resource survey of that building? Or do we need that? Is that helpful?
Sure.
Commissioner Jacoby, would you like to make that motion, since was your idea in the first place? Second, I'll second it. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None? Okay, there you go. You have a motion from the HPC that
Okay.
we get a cultural resource survey of the Tower of Compassion.
And we will vet it with Parks folks. Ultimately, it's a city council decision too, so we might touch base there. See if there's any reason, be whether for or against it, so.
Okay, anything else from the retreat that commissioners would like to discuss? No? Okay. Oh,
Sorry,
yeah, it's all right.
I keep going through my notes.
Commissioner Sibley.
And this actually goes back to something that you were talking about.
I'm so old, I forgot.
Well, I have it highlighted here. Oh, sorry, as they disappear from screen. So we were talking about, and I can't remember where it is in your document, but we were talking about designating a property without like doing
Owner's
it,
consent?
yeah, without owner's consent. Did you happen to catch the Fort Collins stuff on that?
I didn't notice that, no.
So, this was kind of interesting because it does say the, if owner is not initiating designation, director shall contact the owner of the house, blah, 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 or property. And basically it says they can send a letter and they have about 5 days to, I guess, respond, but it said such written request for consent shall be deemed as having been received for the purposes upon passage of 5 days, blah, blah. Anyways, I will give you this if you are interested, because I thought, well, that kind of ties into what we were talking about.
Yeah,
And
sure.
you had brought up some information about that.
So it basically says if they don't respond, it will be designated?
It's just gonna get designated after 5 days, so, unless there's fine print I don't understand, but.
5 days seems like a pretty short period of time.
Yeah, it was like, well, I mean, there was more to it, but it was kind of one of these things where, if they wanted to put information on.
Do we need to worry about whether that would constitute a taking?
Yes. Yeah, I got it. Well, he's turning it off now. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Partial taking.
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that a little deeper. I know my experience has been, and I think rightfully so, there is usually a much higher bar for designation without the owner's consent than with. Places I've worked in the past, they had, a list of criteria, and if the owner consented, you had to meet like 1, maybe 2, but if the owner did not want to, they had to meet like 4 or 5 of like 7 criteria. So there's definitely a higher bar that, rightfully should be established in that case, but we'll take a look at
Yeah,
that and see what we can.
again, I didn't understand all of it, but it caught my attention after our discussion, so.
My guess is this is one test. Notifying the owner,
Probably.
because it refers back to another section, which I think probably has a few other things.
I'm sure that there is, yeah, I was looking at it quickly and.
But yeah, well, look at it.
Commissioner Barnett?
One of the things we talked about was Historic Preservation Month, and I know you said something about there's going to be a city council on May 23rd. Is there anything else? We talked about us doing something, or possibly an interview with
I think that's what we
chairman,
could
or-
commit to. And we certainly, all the commissioners should come for that too. Generally get a picture with city council and,
So, with.
but we did talk about a mailing and I think we said we just don't have the horsepower right now to. And besides that, I think to do a mailing, I think we want to reference any new ordinance as far as demolition. I think we'd like to get two for one.
And
And then we got the Kanemoto thing, don't forget that, so.
I don't know all my months, but Historic Preservation Month is May. So at the end of Historic Preservation Month, we're gonna have an event with City Council.
May 23rd.
Yeah, kind of the end. Memorial Day weekend is the next weekend, so it's pretty much,
I think that's the first regular meeting in May. Something happened,
well, maybe, but it just seems that, I mean, one of the things I liked, and I hate not just volunteering chairman, but I really think that we should have some kind of a public exposure that we're aware of Historic Preservation Month, and that this is, have an interview, set up an interview with Steve and somebody at the Longmont paper. I mean, so it just seems that something should happen during the month. And not just say at the end, well, we're just celebrating Preservation Month and it was last month. It seems kind of an afterthought. Not that the city council shouldn't do it, but just, I would prefer that it come up in an April meeting, but, that May is such and such, or that we get it earlier in the month. But at the very least, I think it would be good to have the public aware that there is a Historic Preservation Commission, that we're doing a bunch of stuff, and that could come out in and an interview with the chair.
We can ask if the newspaper's interested.
Sorry?
And I think realistically, this is something we can start looking at now for next year as well, and putting in work programs. We can, you know, if we start thinking about it now, we can, because so many of these things need to be done pretty far in advance. So we'll start, you know, doing some brainstorming for 2024.
Okay, and I think that's a good idea, but I still would like to discuss the idea of having Steve do an interview. And if that crosses any lines that I'm not aware of with the city,
I don't have a problem with it, but I can't make them do an article, Steve. But we can touch base with them and
I'm
explain
sorry,
to them.
we say them, I'm missing.
The press.
Okay, but, you know, that's, okay, so that would be coordinated with you and Steve then? Or
We can touch base with the newspaper and see if they'd be interested. If Steve is willing.
Just
I'm
for
feeling
the
like I'm gonna
record,
get
last
elbowed.
year I did approach the Times Call with a suggested article on saving the Dickens barn and the history of Mary Dickens and so on. And thank you very much, didn't happen. So, you know, it is a private paper and they're allowed to do what they want. Certainly worth a try though, but yeah, we really should, we talked last year about planning ahead this year. We didn't do it. And if we really want to make more of a deal of Preservation Month, I think really we have to make more of a deal of it ourselves in the next several months, not wait until next April.
Just real quick, the Zlatan barn, is that a done enough deal that could be public knowledge, or is that still sort of getting all settled out?
Next agenda on the item.
Okay, all right, okay.
Next item on your
Next item,
agenda.
okay, all right. Oh, yeah, I guess I ought to look at my own agenda.
We have to shift gears to talk about.
Commissioner Sibley.
I don't know who does this. I get emails from every Longmont group that I can possibly sign up for, so apologies. I think this comes from the city, but there is a weekly events email that I get. Maybe it's Daily Camera, I'm not sure. But anyways, they will send all these different things, and it's everything from, you know, what's happening at a brewery with trivia night to whatever. And I was wondering, I don't know if Hover House, or if anybody has tours that are even just regular tours that they do all the time, that maybe we could, you know, gather some of those things. And I'd even be happy to just call the museum and say, hey guys, what stuff do you have happening that we could just like throw out there and say, hey, in celebration for, and then, you know, tag it on to one of these things. So at least there's something, even if it's not something special. Somebody that's been in town just a few years isn't gonna know. So that might be a way to show that there is some stuff out there without reinventing the wheel. So I don't know who does the marketing for that stuff, so.
I don't either.
Commissioner Barnard.
want to come back to the community meetings idea that we talked about, and the idea of having two people from the HPC set up some type of community meetings. I don't want that to get lost, but I haven't heard anything from staff, whether staff has to be involved or whether it's, or how we would proceed. And this item that concerns me a little bit, and I wanted to pursue this also, was the report from council that we got saying that when two of us, if any two of us are discussing something, it's an open meeting. And I'm not sure how that works. I mean,
I thought
whether
it was 3, sorry.
It's 3 for us.
it's 3 for us? Okay, well, my notes were wrong then. That's fine then.
So if, I guess just to follow that up, if we did have two commissioners sitting, notice that we were there for some sort of resource, if people wanted to show up and talk about things, is there any need for any staff to manage that? What's the sort of protocol for those sort of things?
So you're talking similar to like the council does.
Right, yeah.
There is staff that do set that up and get that advertised and everything.
Okay.
So we would probably reach out to them
Yeah.
and see if they have the capacity to do that.
My thought was that we could, perhaps a good time to try that would be if we, once this ordinance, suggested ordinance got put out, you know, it can be potentially around that if there's, I don't know if that makes sense, actually. I guess it's sort of after the fact, but,
Well, you could do that before it's adopted.
yeah. Just to have a topic, you know, anything, I don't know. But I guess it's something to think about, and perhaps if there are other commissioners that would be interested. I mean, at some point, there's a matter of, you know, there's only so much time in the day, and this isn't anyone's day job here on the commission either, right? And, you know, speak for myself, I have a fair amount going on. So I, you know, there's a limit to how much I got to stretch myself to do these things. I mean, one phone call with a paper is no big deal, but we'd need to have a kind of a willingness as a body to do this, you know, each. Yeah.
I was just thinking, how many people typically show up for coffee with council? Do you get a large number or a small number? Is it very variable?
We had over 60 last
60 and you do it monthly. So, and that's covering all topics for the city. I have a tough time thinking we're going to get a consistent number of people interested in historic information if we did this on a regular basis. One thing I was thinking just while we're talking here is sometimes they have Main Street festivals and people set up booths for everything and anything. And we could set up a booth there for historic preservation. We could invite the St. Vrain Historical Society to come there too. And just whatever we can do, get manpower there, anything historic, just to drag people in and maybe raise awareness at some event like that. That would be a one-time event for the year maybe, but there's a million people milling around on Main Street at that time. And so I think the odds of engaging people might be better at something like that than just sitting down at Ziggy's and saying, hey, come talk to us. And we'd just be sitting there watching our coffee go cold, I think, frankly.
Judging by the number of people at public invited to be heard on Tuesday's city council in comparison to the folks who came here, I would tend to agree with you. All right, well, let's keep that on the conversation. I think it would be worth it'd be just essentially just having some sort of update some agenda column in every meeting where we can just kind of go through some of these things and just talk about have space to talk about what we might want to do. Okay. All right, let's then go to the last item on the agenda, which is the Dickens Barn Preservation Plan update.
Sure. So really just the update on this one is we are trading the agreement back and forth with lawyers and have some little details that we need to finish coordinating with our parks people. But fingers crossed, hopefully by the next meeting, we'll be at a point where we have signed agreements that we can send up the food chain, as it were.
Right, and then, we do have to have a formal, action by the HBC on that condition regarding the 7-Eleven.
Okay, so could that happen next meeting on the 4th?
We're hoping.
That is my goal.
Okay, so that would be great, right? And if that happens on the 4th, that is in fact at the beginning of Historic Preservation Month, and perhaps
Would
could be
huge
a,
win.
yeah, just be a big win, and that might be something really worth, the paper might be more interested in something like that. And then if you know, what myself or some other commissioner wants to comment to the paper on the record about that particular item, that's maybe a little more exciting than just talking to the preservation commissioner about whatever they have on their mind. I'm thinking that's a worthwhile sort of newsworthy point, and that might accomplish our goals.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, well, that's great.
It's a photo op.
Yeah, right, yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Any questions on that for staff, or we're good? Okay. Great, all right. Well, then, any other comments from HPC commissioners? Anyone else have anything they would like to say tonight? Sorry, I didn't. Yeah, go ahead.
You said that staff said they were gonna look into the available funds, just reminder to, at some point, I mean, I already made my reservation, so I'm going whether there's any reimbursement or not, so. For the, saving places in La Junta, in August, 27th to 29th, I think it is.
Yeah, they do an on-the-road thing in La Junta. That is on my list to check into as well, so stay tuned. I'll be looking into that. Hopefully. Yeah, it's a once-a-year thing they do in addition to the February conference. They kind of do a road trip.
Okay. Great. Well, I'd just like to thank staff for the efforts that you've made, especially recently here with the retreat and so on, and getting us set up and getting us moving. I really do appreciate the work that's involved in that, and I'm sure all the commissioners do. Any comments from our city council representative?
Thank you, Chair Lane. Just real quick, some thoughts on Historic Preservation Month is that the city does employ a social media team, and social media teams often need content to help push, right? And I think that'd be something that would be an easy thing that they could incorporate into their work, you know, as far as being informative on behalf of the city. So it's something to think about, especially if you're looking at trying to get in front of May instead of at the end of May, right? As far as the proclamation is concerned. So just an idea there. I don't know if I'm pretty sure the museum does it, but historic walking tours, but they may not be doing it yet because of weather. I'm not sure. That'd be something you'd have to confer with the museum about. So that would be another one that you could possibly, an existing thing like an event that you could tie into, or that, you know, the social media team could tie into as well. So just some ideas that wouldn't require so much, you know, muscle from staff. It'd be fairly easy to put together. I think that could also serve the Historic Preservation Commission goals for highlighting Historic Preservation Month. Outside of that, thank you all for your time. So.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm trying to look up on my calendar here when Eric was doing his tours. I know I am doing a tour coordinated with the museum, a historic tour in early June, so it'll be after the Preservation Month, but it will be in early June. I don't think I put down here when Eric is doing his tour, so I'm not sure when he is, but again, I think he's waiting for warmer weather.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I would accept a motion to adjourn. All right, so I'm going to call that a motion from Commissioner Jacoby and seconded by Sibley. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time.